Oh, hello, it's Gelfling Music. In this video, I will show you the fingering system of different flutes. Now, there are three main fingering systems. The rest are the same or virtually the same. And we'll start with the standard 6-hole flute. Now, there are many different kinds of 6-hole flutes out there. There are some with less holes that have more limited scale, but for the full scale, there's plenty of these. We're going to use the Irish penny whistle for this, and this one's in C, but it doesn't matter what key it's in, you can still convert to the same numbers. Use my number chart here, because numbers are a lot easier for some people. The plus above it is just second octave, so we'll start with the 6, the lowest note. It's called 6 because all 6 holes are covered. So the next one is called a 5 because all 5 holes are covered. And so on. Now these holes covered down here, when I go that high, it's just for support. It doesn't change the note. Now the second octave is, the first of the second octave is done 2 different ways. You can just all holes covered blowing harder, or you can do this way, just cover the top one. Gets pretty loud, but you blow a lot harder and harder as for up to second scale. And now we'll do the flats. The 6th flat can't actually be done if you hold the bottom of the flute with your knee, but you probably never have to do that in a song. And so the 5 flat, 5 holes covered, is half of the next hole covered. And then the 4, the next hole half covered. And then the 3 is actually 2 different ways to do it. Yeah, you can half cover the next hole, or you can skip the next hole and cover the next 2. And then you go to the 2 flat is just 2 and the next hole half covered, or skipping it and doing the next 2, or covering it with the next 2. So there's 2 different ways, and that's some notes, or it's like easier for go from the 2 to floor and keep lifting these fingers from the when you're doing a jig. Sometimes it is faster to cover this one and going from 2 to 4. See, sometimes it's a little easier. Now, some holes on some flutes are a natural flat, but you still use the same numbering converting system. And the flutes that have like 5 holes, Native American flute, they're more limited range, but it's just easy to play and sound real good. I'll show you the scale on this one. Or some of them have this thing you can slide up and use that hole, and then here's the scale with the 6 holes. So there are many different flutes. Many different sounds, the hole size, the spacing, the width of the flute, but they all use the same pretty much fingering. Or if you have a real wide one and a skinny one like this, go ahead, sneak it in there, hide inside that one, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. And now the recorder. This is also an ancient instrument, also called the sweet flute. And this one has a thumb hole on the bottom, and not 6 but 7 holes on the top. These bottom 2 are split into 2 to make the flats easier to do. And using this chart here, down to the next one, bagpipe recorder. Recorder will start with 7 because only 7 holes on the top are covered. The bagpipe has the same fingering, except it only goes to 9 notes. So 7 is 7 holes on top covered. Now 6 holes on top are covered. Now, this is actually not the 0. I call it the P because P is the first letter of the word pulgar, which is thumb in Spanish. Only your thumb hole is covered. Now all holes covered, uncovered. Then the second octave, you actually start with 5, and the thumb hole is half covered. Blowing harder. Then the 4, blowing harder. The higher you go, you cover more of the thumb hole to where it's just barely covered, blowing harder. And this one can do slightly into the 3rd octave. And there are other types that are a little different fingering. Some ancient ones like Gasani, Renaissance recorder, might be a little different fingering. But the same as the 6-hole standard flute, it's just all holes covered and going up. So that's the same, except for now there's more holes. And the flats are also the same principle. You just, so a 6 flat is just covering only one of these subholes. 5 flat covering only one of these subholes. Then the same principle as the flute. Also, you can skip the next hole, cover the next 2 to do a flat, like a 3 flat. And then the 2 flat, or half cover the next hole. So that part is so very, very similar, almost the same, but with more holes. There are other flutes out there, like the Quena flute from the Andes, which also have a thumb hole, but it has just 6 holes on the top. But it's the same scale, all holes covered, and then going up scale, then you uncover the bottom hole. But this one does not do the next octave up higher. And then you have the same with the Pungi flute from India, which also has a thumb hole, but it does have 7 holes on the top, like a recorder. But does not go higher by blowing harder in that trick. And the recorders come in as soprano, alto, and then the tenor. And then your fingering spacing gets so far apart it can be really hard to cover all the holes, and really something to get used to. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And there's also one that's higher soprano. There's also ones even deeper. So they're both very unique, beautiful instruments, just different. And now the ocarina fingering, using the standard 12-hole ocarina. Now this one can have the same fingering as the recorder when you don't use the subholes. Most songs you're not going to use the subholes at all. So you use then the finger chart here for the recorder, except the ends are different. The ocarina one is down here, starting with 8, but that's when you cover a subhole. We'll get to that. And the STL ocarina has their finger chart, but I think it's kind of illogical. Why is there a dot below a few and then an I? What's an I? And O dashes after it for the time signature? Why don't you just make a hollow number and more similar to the original sheet music, making it too different then. Now, being the same fingering as the recorder, just leaving this pinky down. Now this pinky has a comfortable place to rest and you forget about it. You only use it for one note. And now uncovering both thumb holes would be an X. And now the only time that you lift the pinky, the highest note, the N, for nothing, nada, no holes covered. And they're the 8 on this chart. When we start with the 8, that means you're going from 7 to 8. You're covering this subhole here. There are some songs like in A or B where you'll cover that hole then to B and B, and there's another way to do the 6, because here's a tip, is to go from the 6 to the 8 can be a little tricky. So here's another way to do the 6. So I'm making that a lot easier. And the other subhole is only covered for doing a B flat. I only know of 2 Kingdom songs that use that. So very few. You may never have to even use that one. And now the flats. As I already stated, covering both double, all holes covered, the B flat or the 8 flat. And the 6 is just 6 with the subhole. And then the 5 is just covering this one down here. And now it gets easier, you just cover the ring finger on your right hand. And now the 0 flat is just a 0 with the ring finger covered. And the X flat is only covering these 2 holes. And now there is a 10-hole ocarina, which they like to claim the 12-hole. Well, they don't make very many 10-hole ocarinas because all the 12-hole can do 2 or 3 more notes higher. No, it does 1.5 notes higher, and it is if you're playing a song that low, and most songs aren't played that low. But the fingering on these are the same, except for Charlie Hines' inline fingering. For some reason, those fingerings are a little different. Now the lowest note is all holes covered, but then you lift your pinky instead of leaving it down, and then you do the scale. And I guess that makes it a little easier to do some of the flats. But a little different. Then you have the 6-hole pendant ocarinas. Well, those are a very different fingering. So if you want to stick with the same fingering, STL Ocarina does have an ocarina, very small. It's a soprano. But you need small hands to play that one. And now for the fingering on harmony ocarinas, I covered in another video. So please let me know in the comments if this video was helpful to you, and thanks for watching. Arigato.